Hello, everyone, and welcome to Signet's webinar. You may notice that Sheila's not here. I am not Sheila. I'm Andrea, Signet's Director of Operations. I know many of you, I see some familiar names already in the chat through our work with your students, but if you are not a current client at Signet, you don't know me. Sheila could not be here unexpectedly. She's got some personal things to attend to, so I am joyfully stepping in, facilitating today's webinar. I love talking about this stuff. Um, we're really here to discuss what juniors need to know about the admissions process. And now is the perfect time of year to start thinking about it, because this is when all the theory of college being this like imaginary thing or this process we'll get to someday, it all turns from theory into getting the work done, doing the things, and like it's it's the real work begins here, right? From mid-junior year all the way into a year from now, where you'll be celebrating your seniors' acceptances into their dream schools. So I have a couple lovely panelists here today, two of our best experts here at Signet on the admissions process. They work with lots of juniors, seniors, and sophomores. They have a good perspective on what our families should be thinking of at this point in their career. I've got a bunch of questions I'm going to pose to them. We're going to have a pretty free-flowing discussion and then leave it open for all of you Q&A at the end of today's meeting. I'd love to introduce you ladies. Holly, why don't you start us off? Tell us about you.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Holly. I've been working in admissions at Cigna, and I believe this is my fifth or sixth year. Can't totally be sure. But I came to this after a career in academia. I served as a professor at the University of Maine for 5 years and served on graduate admissions committee there into our department. So at Cigna, I worked in graduate admissions and then found my way into undergraduate admissions as well. I love it because I think, you know, being on the end where I was dealing with lots of college students and people freshly arriving, I saw sort of, the students that were more aware of what they needed and what they wanted out of college and what their goals were, just really clicked and succeeded so much better. And so I've traced that, through working at Signet to these high schoolers that are really conscious of their process when they're going through the admissions process and really understanding who they are and writing these essays. And it really becomes really like a wonderful time for reflection. So anyway, I'm honored to be a part of that.
Thanks, Holly. Tina, how about you? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Awesome. So, hi everyone. My name is Tina Duong. I'm one of the admissions consultant also with Signet. I want to say for the past 3 years, but prior to that, was working with another college for a few years as well. But how I kind of got into this work is I started working first in admissions with the University of Southern California for about 5 years as an assistant director and senior assistant director there. So really working with, of course, both students in high school, through the freshman process, but also transfer students as well. And so I know, navigating this process is very much of a pivotal time that I think can bring in a lot of different types of emotions, both excitement, but also can be overwhelming, stressful. And also a very much of a deep exploration process as well. So I started first with admissions. During my time there, pursued my master's in counseling, and so since then I've shifted over to counseling, specifically working with business students. But in addition to, of course, navigating these experiences, I've also am now reading with the University of California, San Diego as well. And so I think, just navigating the admission process is such a, I think, a critical time, and really excited to be on this panel with Holly for today, as well as Andrea.
Thanks, Tina. Um, Great. Well, to ground us a little bit before we go into some questioning, I love the title of our webinar today, Inside the Black Box, How College Apps Are Really Evaluated and what that means for our high school juniors. I think that resonates with a lot of the families I talked to on the way into Signet and throughout their time, that there's so much information coming in. There's so many different angles that people take. They're hearing from their schools and their kids and their peers in the media and the internet and so there's so much coming at them. It's hard to navigate to what is the truth and what do I actually need to do with it? How do I kind of weed out all of the noise that might be coming through and come to a place of clarity? We've seen it like time and time again that often our role in the process becomes clearing out all the background noise to help our students focus on what they actually need to do and what is actually going to serve them individually to be the most successful in this college process and beyond as possible. Um, I think that's a good place to kind of start. I don't want to start with tactics. I want to start a little bit more broad and understand from you both how you wish most parents of juniors understood this year in the admissions process. Um, Holly, you want to start? You can fill in.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Um, for me, I think so. This stage you mentioned before, this stage is sort of where things start to feel real and people start to be like, yeah, I gotta do stuff. They may feel behind already all of a sudden, like a rug has been pulled out from under them. But I really like to remind the families that I'm working with that the first step that makes all of this process easier is reflection and really understanding what does your student want, what is going to help them succeed, what is the real goal that's true for them and not just a bunch of flashing lights or things that they think they need for the moment. And if you take the time to do that deeply and start that process, then the things that follow will go more smoothly. You will have less unexpected pivots, you will have less rebellion, all of those things. And so for me, I really like to ground that. Like if I'm hearing when I ask questions of like, oh, even if you don't know your major, do you know what kind of experience you want to have? You know what your classes are going to look like? Do you know where you might meet your friends? If those questions are really difficult to answer, that should be a first place to start in my book.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
love that. And I think reflection is a huge thing for me too, but I think to also add to that, in addition to the reflection piece, is also organization. I know, as we've talked about, there's just so many things I think, especially during this time of year as a junior, that you're navigating. Of course, your academics, potentially testing, your extracurricular activities, and really kind of, being able to kind of keep track of all that can be, very overwhelming. And so I think the organization piece, the more organized you are at the start of the process, that can be really helpful since there's just so many, I think, competing demands at the same time. And so the more organized you are, I think that also helps with the stress and pressure as well. Because I think oftentimes the stress and pressure can often just travel down so fast. And so it is, we're going to name it like it is a stressful process, I think, at times, but I think the organization piece really helps, I think, students and also, of course, families, I think, feel less anxious through the process, as well as, I think, really focusing in on, of course, really building in like the self-care, the well-being piece, because, as you're navigating this process, it is important to take care of yourself as well, regardless of how many different competing demands there are through that.
Yeah. Lovely. I think if I can add, because I don't do the work directly with students the way that Holly and Tina do here, but I talk to a lot of families. I see a lot of names here that I've talked to at least once or twice. And I think when I talk to new junior families coming in, um, I try to lead them towards um, depth and authenticity versus doing more. Like casting a wide net is not always the best thing to do because it's going to lead to that burnout feeling, that running around like a chicken with your head off feeling, the feeling like, why am I doing all of these different things? And there's no clear answer, right? Leaning into the why, leaning into the reflection, leaning into does my student really need, desire, and dream for? It really builds the foundation for not only like a successful college process, but like a sane college process that doesn't feel so harried and all over the place. Which leads me to my next question for the ladies here. What's one misconception that you think junior parents bring into this process? Um, Tina, you want to start that one?
Sure. I think one of the misconceptions that I think parents that I see often have is I think that the idea that colleges or just navigating the college admission process, they're looking for really just perfection or like a specific linear story or a specific, kind of student. But I think that is, I will say, incorrect. Colleges are they are really wanting to understand students as a whole. And so I think when considering, sometimes there can be pivots, there can be things that come up, there are growth moments, but there can also be maybe missteps and things like that as well. And I think all of that is going to be real through the process. And I think it really showcases, of course, the real experience of a student as well. And so, with that being said, all those are things that I think are certainly considered through the process, but really providing that context is so key in understanding the student experience and also, of course, who the students are. And so I think that also ties into what Andrea was saying in terms of the depth piece as well, because I think the depth of course, how students navigate that can also be transcended, I think, through the college admission process, in the various, of course, areas that colleges are evaluating as well. But I think that's something that I just really want to stress on because colleges aren't looking for a specific type of student. They're really looking for a wide range of students. And so, they're really wanting to understand the full picture of a student versus, a specific student that I think oftentimes parents or people who are not working directly with students might think that they're looking for.
Great. Same question, Holly.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's such a gift and a stress reliever to know, like, a B plus isn't going to ruin my chances at college, or that people have to fit a certain mold to fit into a certain college. Um, I would say I think this sometimes people might have this idea like, or they might not consciously have it, that one size fits all in terms of this process. So they may be comparing their student to another sibling or other students that they see, and oh, they already have their list. They've already visited these schools, or they've already done these things. They're applying to this many schools, and the earlier you can give up comparing what is right for your kid between like two things that are right for other people, the better off you'll be, because it really, really depends. And it would be nice in the admissions work that we do to just like have a master calendar and say that, oh, okay, all of our students are going to have their college list done by February, and then everyone's going to be here. But it doesn't work like that, and it shouldn't, right? Because people will go through the stage of the process that they're ready for. And even though we'll recommend an order and try and just because we know from experience it can ease stress and smooth over some rough patches, your student's journey does not have to look like anyone else's for it to be successful.
That's such a good call out, Holly. I especially hear that in families who come to us with multiple siblings. I know you've had the experience a couple times of working with a younger sibling in a family. And like the two processes look very different, both because of different students, but every year there is some difference in the admissions process, whether it's how selective certain schools are, or when the due dates are, or what the questions that they're going to have to write about are, or what just like the global landscape of admissions look like is. So I also like to validate if you're here and this is not your first kid and you're like, I still feel like I'm here back in square one, that is so normal. I can't tell you how many times I hear that, right? So it's about meeting the moment, meeting your student, understanding again, them, reflecting, being authentic. Starting from that piece really is the driver of this successful process. Again, not only does it make it less painful, but you get better results at the end of the day, too. Um, I want to pivot and ask a couple questions about standardized testing, which I'm super curious about both of your takes on. Um, a lot of students, may have taken tests sophomore year. They might have taken it early junior year. I know plenty of people still are making decisions around testing this point in junior year. It's certainly not too late, but you're going to want to have to have a little bit of a plan in place so we're not again going all over the place senior year. So my first question, how should families decide whether standardized testing should even be part of their students' journey, knowing how the test optional piece has come into the landscape lately? Holly, what do you think?
To me, the cornerstone of most of this process that follows is the college list. Even if it's an evolving document, having, Tina mentioned organizing as well, like having a nice organized sort of system for keeping track of the colleges you're looking at is key. And I'd recommend, as we do when we're doing our consulting, is pulling the score ranges for those schools, and taking a look and just seeing where, if your student has taken diagnostic tests, where are they falling? Do these feel like these are achievable scores to get well in that range to a point where submitting scores would improve the application? If it's not, or there are significant barriers to improving a score, like some students may have learning differences that just make standardized tests a horrible measure of their capabilities. And sometimes it's the humane thing to just be like, well, look, this is not going to affect your admissions chances at these schools that much. You can let this go and spend that time doing something that's going to enrich your application or your life. Hopefully both. So I'd say that, and when you're doing your college list, track any schools that require it. Sometimes that's the trigger, right? If a dream school requires it, then plan to go for it. If a student really feels the need to apply to their dream school for them this process to feel complete, then they should know early enough as possible to be able to prepare for that.
Excellent. Yeah, Tina, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything Holly said. I think, of course, the practice or diagnostic test, of course, is important. The college list, kind of matching that as well. And I think just something to add too is, if there is, for example, like a school that you're really wanting to go to, and it requires it, something to kind of note, of course, I think from the admission lens too, is testing is only part of the process. And so with that being said, if it is, it comes down to this is kind of the make or break it in regards to like the school you really want to go to requires testing. With that, of course, if it is you're still somewhere that you're applying to, I think something to note too is there's typically often, of course, for most colleges, like additional information sections and things like that as well. And so I think really being able to kind of highlight the context piece, again, going back to what I had mentioned earlier about the context and really sharing that is really key to fully understand the picture of the student as well. So I think that's the only thing that I wanted to add, just, the context piece and if it does come to that.
Okay. Thank you. I will note that we can and have spent a whole hour talking about that concept alone, right? Should we test or not test? Is the SAT better than the ACT for my student? What have you? I encourage you to, look at those webinar materials. I'm happy to share further details on that if it's something that's really like stuck in your head. But something I just want to highlight as you are making this decision is that preparing for a test takes a lot of energy and time. Um, and I think families sometimes don't realize the cost that that can have in terms of their application, right? We're so used to saying, oh, like, of course we need testing. We've always needed testing. SAT is important. But sometimes other things might be more important. Getting the better grades is always more important. Not always. It is, we want to make sure that the test prep isn't taking away from other aspects of their application where they're really going to shine. So that's kind of the underlining thing that I like to say to families. But a good point that some of these dream schools are just going to require it. And it can be required for some students and not required for others. So again, understanding your student and their goals is going to point you to the right decision around testing. So again, if testing's really on your mind, I encourage you to chat with me, reach out to me later. Obviously, testing is something that Cigna can support on alongside admissions, but I want to keep us out of that rabbit hole just because I know it's a juicy one. So I want to talk about college lists. We hear a lot about making a college list means making a balanced list, and that can mean and be interpreted 100 different ways. But I'm interested in hearing from both of you when you're working with your students, how do you navigate it to a balanced list and how do you define it? So Tina, what do you think?
Yes, I know often when we talk about college list and kind of the balance of it, we're often thinking about, reach schools, maybe more like likely or match schools, and then potentially safety schools. But I think when I think about it in my work with students, Um, it goes deeper than that. I think there's a lot more depth in that because I think it really also comes down to really finding and identifying specific best fit schools for students. And I think best fit can mean a lot of things depending on the student because it is very much tailored to, of course, what they're looking for in a college environment, where they will not only, just go to school, but really, I think, thrive and really be able to take advantage of all the different opportunities and just, experiences that they might have there. And so I think really identifying, and I think this goes back to what Holly had mentioned earlier in regards to the reflection process. I think really being able to take time to reflect with that, for students and really helping them, I think, identify those key pieces, then I think kind of correlates into this aspect in terms of what best fit means to then really find a balanced college list. I think also some other things that I think about too is really about timeline and strategies. And so I think this goes back to the organization piece that I mentioned, simply because, of course, for a lot of schools, right, that students are going to be looking into applying to, oftentimes there's different ways to apply to schools, whether that's early decision, early action, regular decision. Um, and so forth. And so I think that's also something to really, I think through with students in regards to really finding, a strategy, but also I think a college list that makes sense for them in a timeline that makes sense for them as well. Since, of course, especially with the fall, I know it can really get busy, with senior year in terms of balancing out all these avenues. And so finding something that works for them, but also making sure that they're able to, again, really take care of themselves through the process to really see this process as a marathon versus, I think, as a sprint through that.
That's great. Yeah, Holly, what do you think?
That's great. I hadn't thought about it in terms of the timeline, but that's perfect because sometimes I end up with students that it's like they want to do every school early, or it just becomes this pig in a python situation, and it's best, yeah, with good planning you can space that out. I was thinking as well of when we say balance list in terms of like the likely reach target, we're thinking about uncertainty in the admissions process, but life is also uncertain as well, right? Finances can be uncertain, choices of interest or environment can be uncertain too. So especially for students where they might not be as sure, sometimes choosing schools that have a variety of paths they could grow into gives them options. So having an option closer to home, maybe, if they're not so sure, having ones that likely might give scholarships or be more financially um, generous or doable for families, maybe just a really smart move. So sometimes yeah, when there's openness and we're not exactly sure what it's going to look like in a year and a half, when we're figuring out these applications, a balanced list maybe means keeping doors open for a couple different pathways.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic that yeah, to not only organize the list based on what you can't control, right, which is the selectivity of the particular school. Um, but organizing it by all those other aspects that can come into play, the things that, we as humans can prioritize for ourselves. I do like the call out on, some really like clear conversations with your students about how many essays are you really going to write? Are you really going to make this deadline? We've several times, I've run into students who have been working with their consultants say, I want to add 5 schools to my list that, I'm going to apply to in the next few weeks. And we have to have some hard conversations about how realistic is that for how much time you have, how much energy you have. Do you really want to go to this school, or did you hear something else? Is it coming from you? Is it coming from another source? Keeping in mind, the workload that comes along with each school. Because some schools, they don't have supplemental essay and you can easily add them to a Common App. It's not that big of a deal. Other schools, that's not the case. So having some realistic conversations about timeline and workload, Tina, I think was really brilliant. Thank you for adding that in. Um, so we're talking a lot about fit and how to think about it. But what do you do with a student when they don't really know yet? They don't know what they want to study or what they want to do. They don't have a super clear picture of where they imagine themselves going to college. What do you do with that? Where do you start? Holly, I'd love to hear from you.
Um, I often get fairly curious about looking at what their life is like now. You know, it's like what classes do you like the most? Where do you feel most comfortable? Are you do you feel most comfortable with your close group of friends that you've known forever, or is it exciting to like go to a new place and meet new people? Um, how do you meet friends? So like th those kind of questions, and that may be very friend heavy, and to some people when that's less important, you just ask about like spaces they're comfortable in, and just kind of getting out ideas of again, this is the reflection piece, I think, of like what's going to feel enough like home that they can put down roots and what's going to be different enough that they can grow and find that magic comfort zone between that that they'll also feel like they can take ownership of too, right? It's their choice as well. So I try to help students come to an idea and articulate what that is. A lot of times they just don't know enough about how to categorize different colleges or the language to describe it. And that's where college visits can be really helpful because they know it when they see it. And if they're, if they're primed to know what to look for, and what they're actually looking for when they're thinking about fit, that can really help raise that awareness of what's the right kind of environment. Um,
Yeah, excellent. Tina, what do you think?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I typically like to ask my students, especially if they're unsure of more about, majors or the kind of the academic side of things, I think similar to Holly as well, not only about their friends, but I think, what do you like doing outside of the classroom? Like, how do you like spending your time? Where do you see yourself, spending and, hanging out on the weekends potentially? Like questions like that to really identify potential opportunities students are wanting, outside of just kind of the academic space. I think other things that I think I really like to explore with students is also really reflecting on their high school experiences, kind of similar to what Holly mentioned in regards to, maybe what are some things that you liked about your high school, but on the other side too, what are some things that you wish could have been different, whether that's, of course, academically or personally or opportunities. In addition to that, I think it's always important too, I think especially for students who might not be sure of kind of their major options or what they're looking to do, I think really being able to explore support opportunities at the colleges, through the research process, maybe perhaps like what advising opportunities are there, what career mentorship opportunities are there that you could potentially get connected to, or, interdisciplinary options or majors, and how does potentially like undecided students kind of get navigate, I mean, the process of declaring the major if they are kind of leaning towards more of that way where they're wanting to kind of explore through their time in college. And so I think those are some of the kind of research opportunities that I'll have students look into, especially as they're developing the school list. I think a few other things too is really highlighting about like the school size that students are wanting. And again, just I think really leaning into more about the exposure piece in regards to where students can potentially not only, of course, lean into, but pivot and change in the case they do change their minds later on, especially if they step into the college space.
I love hearing you both talking about how the discussion around putting a school list together all comes from a conversation about the student and how well they know themselves, getting closer with like building your rapport as a consultant and student to really get to know them and make some recommendations. It goes to show why you can't build a school list in an hour. Right. Some people, if they've been doing work and it's all in their head and they've thought about it for years, like, yes, sometimes you can like list out those schools you've been thinking of in an hour, but this can be a kind of an involved process and it's okay, right? It's better to take the time, go slowly, do it from a place of truth than hear, well, my friends have their school list, so I'm just gonna like, Google a bunch of stuff and like just see and come up with a list because then that list, when you have to start writing about why you want to go to that school, gets really hard to manage and starts to really divulge from um, a path that's true to that student. So again, we're hearing the through line over and over again that it all comes from authenticity here. Um, so I get this question a lot. What's a healthy number of schools for students to apply to explore seriously? Um, and why? Yeah, what it changes every year, I feel like. What's your current stance on number of schools to apply to? Tina, what do you think?
Yeah, I always go back and forth, I will say, with this question, or I know I often get this question a lot, but I think, of course, with the exploration process, I do want to highlight, I know Andrea was really stressing of how school list constantly changes or can change. And I think there's a lot of truth in that because I think, the more students reflect, do research, I think really take the time to continue, I think, diving in and getting to know themselves through this process, they really do find things that they initially thought they liked, but no longer like anymore, and vice versa. And so I think it's a continuous process with that. But I would say, in terms of seriously applying, I would say anywhere benchmark around the 10. It can be good, but I think it also depends on, of course, some of the things that we mentioned earlier in terms of, what do the supplements look like? Is it a supplement for every single school? And so those are some things that I think really kind of goes into this as well, through the development of course, the college list and also the application process. But I think 10 is a good number. And the reason why I would say that is because I think it still preserves depth over, I think, just adding schools to your list, because again, it is you really want to be intentional with the process. And of course, the schools that you're looking into, I would say 10, especially if there's balance, right? Going back to the balance piece, between, of course, your list, but also maybe the timelines and the application process and things like that. It might not feel as overloading. And I think that allows you to, of course, still apply widely to an extent, but at the same time, really protecting your bandwidth through the process as well. Because I think the senior year fall can already be a stressful period, with everything that is happening. But I think 10, I think is kind of a good balance between both of those avenues. In addition to that, I think it also does help with the decision making process that comes later down the line as well. Because of course, applying is one thing, but you are in the end, right, going to need to make a decision on, of course, your admission decisions as well. And so I think if you are really being intentional with building out your college list, really making sure you're adding schools that is reflective of spaces that you want to be, then I think that really helps with that process.
Sure. Thanks, Tina. Holly, how do you compare?
Yeah. Well, the question being phrased as explore is tough, right? Because I think there's when you're doing all of this research, I usually, so the way I do it with my students is I'll have a spreadsheet and we'll write down every school we've looked at, like that we've researched and gotten notes from and everything. And then if we're not interested, we gray it out and we move it down to like the gallery of shame. But I like to preserve that because sometimes it helps because every once in a while parents will get a panic of like, we haven't looked at enough schools, we're missing an opportunity, like, the perfect diamond in the rough is missing or something. And that just helps reassure people that it's like we've really done a lot of research and we rejected these schools for reasons, right? So the could be 30 of those schools, 20 or 30 or something that we've like total kind of looked at and then found reasons why we're prioritizing 10, sometimes more. Like I will cap at 15. I think that's within the last few years. It's been growing a little, in part because we saw so much volatility within, particularly like after COVID. But still, really surprising results. And it seems from year to year, we're seeing sort of seismic changes that will happen due to, Supreme Court decisions or government regulations or things like that. So I think it's okay to grow a little, especially if students are applying to more highly rejected schools, as we might call them, the absolute most selective schools. There's no way they're all extreme reaches. There's no way to really confidently predict what's going to happen. I think so. Then in those cases, if students have enough time and they're willing to prepare those applications, I'll support them in stretching up to 15. But that's more recent. I don't love it. It's justified in those cases, I think.
Yeah, totally. And another great example of how it can vary for individual students, right? The students who are maybe a bit like more willing to do a lot of writing and are able to do it on their own, don't need as much support, might be able to handle a higher number of schools, and students who need a little bit more support or need a little bit more structure. But I also love the idea that, yeah, maybe we're applying to the 10 to 15, but the exploration phase, the school list might start way longer, and then you are the ones rejecting the schools. I love that you use that term, right? That like Yeah, this is just as much about students finding schools that meet their criteria as it is the other way around. Maybe even more so, students finding their own criteria can take a lot of exploration to get down to that final 10 to 15 schools. But anything more than that, you're asking for trouble, unfortunately, and the workload, and the ultimate decision making you'll have to do. That's such a good point too, Tina. Um, okay, when we talk about the application narrative, right? Which we might have said a couple times in our discussion. It certainly comes up when I talk about admissions with families or out there in the world, right? The narrative of admissions your application, something we hear a lot. What does that mean? And also, what does it not mean? Because there's certainly some misconception out there. Holly, I'd love to hear what you think.
Oh man. Um, so I mean, I like using the word narrative because it implies there's depth and character and complexity, and that it brings all of those feelings in there. But I think it also implies that it might be linear, or that there's one type, or there's some negative baggage that comes with that term. So yeah, you can just let those parts of it go, right? And what I really like when in an application is, maybe the personal statement is a strong, direct way that a student has to speak, right? And tell a story. But then you have these other facets sort of shining light on the application through your letters of recommendation, through the activities that you do, through your transcript, the courses that you've chosen, and the way you spend your time and those resources. So I actually like to think of it as something that's more complex. And so even if there's one story that's being told in the application essay, I love to see a contrasting or surprising value pop up and resonate in other pieces of the application. I love to see depth and complexity that's formed. And the words I was trying to come up with as I was thinking of this were like echo chamber and hall of mirrors, which all imply like illusions. I haven't come up with like the perfect description of it. But for me it's that, right? Like it's creating the sort of resonance of a complicated person that may not totally be defined in a story.
Yeah, yeah, I'm thinking of like it's like not about fitting an archetype or like
Hmm.
finding this persona that you're narrowing into. But yeah, showing all the surprising sides of a student and like putting things together so there's like a cohesive picture of who they
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
Tina, I'm definitely curious about you, particularly your experience reading applications, and how you kind of perceive narrative, how you read for narrative, how that came into play when you were making your acceptance decisions.
Yeah, I think a lot of things come to mind, but I think some of the questions that, especially in evaluating applications, really some of the questions that I typically ask myself when doing so is really, how did the student maybe challenge themselves academically, not only with the resources and opportunities that are offered at their school, but really beyond that as well in the case they did. Also, I love to kind of look at maybe what do students care about, and this can be seen maybe again through their essays or, of course, their activity or extracurricular activities, leadership opportunities, and things like that. How do they spend their time outside of the classroom? Of course, yes, they are going to be taking classes, but what do they do beyond that? And maybe how have they processed and really navigated their life experiences through high school, and maybe have grown through that process as well. And so I think those are some of the key things that I really look to, and I think that is demonstrated in many different ways. I think, again, through their story, but also, of course, through their involvement. And I really like to see, I want to echo, of course, what Holly was saying in terms of kind of looking for like patterns that kind of come up, throughout, of course, the application, sometimes in different avenues, right? I think that's really critical to kind of note as well. And I think it often definitely does not mean that we're looking for something linear through the process. We just really want to understand the student full picture and full story. And so I think going back to this, I think context really matters. I think in many different avenues, we're not looking for, of course, perfect GPAs. We're really, again, looking for how students challenge themselves. If there's a dip, for example, in a specific year, maybe due to something that happened. Again, I think really being able to, from the student perspective, really being able to share that context and really kind of walk, the admission officer through kind of the space and time of that is going to be key because I think it really enhances and highlights and provides, again, just more context in regards to might what have happened with that.
Yeah, great. So I'm hearing a lot of good things, but I'm catching a bit on the what it isn't. Right? The application narrative, and tell me if I'm wrong. It is not like maxing out skills and maxing out stats and looking at every piece of my application and look at all the things that I did and all the maxed out. And that's my narrative, right? That of course it's not like that sort of thing hurts a student, but it's not necessarily what admissions officers are screening for, right? They're screening for a fully well-rounded person who has some achievement that has met some bar that they're looking for. But what you really want to know is, as I'm hearing, is like your student is going to be a good person who's going to be successful at whatever campus you're reading for. That's much more than statistics. But
Correct.
I'm also, oh, you go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, yes, I totally agree with that. And I think oftentimes there's a misconception, right, that, the student who's applying has to have a perfect resume or a perfect story or the most impressive, achievement, for example. But I think that's really not the case. I think it's really understanding the real life interest and impact as well. And I think going back to what I had mentioned earlier about best fit, I think it's also showcasing, especially like how are you going to be how are you going to be best fit for this institution, right? So I think really being able to also, from the admission perspective, it's important for students to really highlight, how they can be best fit for, whatever institution they're applying to, because I think that really shows them that they are really going to be successful here and really, again, take advantage of the opportunities that are reflected as well versus, I think, any other college that's out there since there's so many.
Excellent. Um, and then I was going to add the other thing that it's not, and this is a misconception I've encountered a couple times, is that I don't know, parents would be like, well, we want to talk about adversity, but my student doesn't have any big trauma, right? We don't have any like gigantic story to tell. They haven't been through this, like anything terrible and awful. What could they possibly write about? Is that what admissions committees are looking for, right? This kind of remarkable over the top story, which of course, some students do have those sorts of stories. We don't steer them away from telling them. But that's also not what we're looking for, right? The student rising to adversity in overcoming challenges can look in all sorts of different scales and ways and kind of perspectives. But Tina, maybe can you validate that point as well?
Correct. Yeah, I think it's not just about those big stories. I think it is really about kind of those everyday moments also. And I think again, each student is unique in its own way, and I think every student has something to highlight. I think it's really the matter of course, kind of putting that into context for yourself. And also not comparing. I think, as humans, we tend to compare. I think both, of course, as a student and also as a parent as well. And so I think that's important to kind of keep in mind.
Okay, we're gonna switch into some like tactical stuff. So, we gave everybody lots of context into um, mindset, how to think about things, how you are approaching things with students, how you know these applications are getting read by admissions advisors at the various schools. But our families here have a junior in the process. What do juniors need to be doing now to set themselves up for strong essays, strong applications, an easy process going forward? Halfway through junior year, what should folks be thinking about and doing? Holly, I'll throw it to you.
I would say capturing ideas. So we're talking about the essays particularly, right? Capturing ideas that things that are important to you, what you might want to write about, if there's anything that's really, you know, central to you. I have a student that she surprised me in a meeting. She's just like, I've been keeping notes, and she had them on her phone, and she had lots of amazing ideas that were all circling around one big point. And that was what led us to be like, okay, like this is the point. That may be a hook, that may be like, some of the meat of it, but like the real point is probably what we're going to work with. So that was wonderful for that student to do that. Um, I also will say that there's a lot of essays. It's not just one. I don't want to scare you now, but depending on the school list, there can be lots and lots of supplemental essays. Um, if you're at a point where you have a school list, you can preview them. You can look at this year's round of essays and just take a look at what kind of topics are being asked. Start thinking, loosely brainstorming as well on those can be very helpful, I find, because it's sort of a lay of the land. Those may change come August 1st, thereabouts, but it's nice to have prepared ideas and have maybe free writes or early drafts sort of waiting so that you can verify them August 1st. Because if you have a lot of essays to do and August 1st hits, that's not a lot of runway to be meeting your early deadlines. So I often encourage people to brainstorm really widely because sometimes an idea for a supplemental essay grows and grows and becomes the Common App essay. So when you start early and you start loose, that allows you to do that.
I love that. Tina, what do you think about, what can juniors start doing to set themselves up? We'll start just with the essays for success
Sure.
on essay.
Yeah, I think to I definitely want to emphasize, I think thinking through critical and pivotal moments is really key. But I think something that in addition to kind of the notes thing that Holly mentioned, I think journaling is such I think a thing that I love to tell students to do kind of through this process, especially as juniors, because I know sometimes thinking about writing an essay can feel very daunting, versus I think journaling, I think feels maybe a little bit less stressful, where sometimes I know students sometimes struggle to kind of just get their thoughts out there and I think really just be able to write. And so I think journaling sometimes takes away kind of that pressure to help I think really students work through that. And so I definitely recommend journaling on maybe critical pivotal moments that they've had in their high school experiences, some of their leadership involvements, or just experiences in general, big moments or small moments that might have happened. I think all those are so key to really build out the essay. And I think to what's mentioned already, there's sometimes a lot of essays that are going to be done through the process. And so I think really having all those can then, lead to some of those as well.
Excellent. I am curious about outside of the essay. We talked a bit about widely researching schools, starting to make a list, going into the reflection side of things, really starting to help your student understand what they want, what's driving them, what they might want to do in college, where they might want to be. What other things would you suggest juniors and their families start doing now if they haven't already? Um, Tina, any
Yeah.
ideas? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think at least with activity lists, something that's good to start now is perhaps like creating a list in regards to, the activities or involvement that they've done so far, potential leadership opportunities or leadership experiences that they've had for some of these organizations. And I think really in a sense, just creating a bullet point list of like everything that they've done. I think that can at least help with, of course, the activities list that they'll, of course, do for the application. I think, having everything kind of in writing in an organized format can be super helpful for that later on. With the college list, I think at least initially starting with maybe colleges that maybe have piqued their interest, doing some high level research. I think, starting to maybe sign up for some of those school visits, or even just something as low level as maybe starting to follow some of these schools on Instagram or social media, or, just starting to follow their like mailing lists and things like that. I think that all those information, which I know can be information overload at the same time, but all those information I think can start to inform students with, of course, a college list if there are schools that they're initially starting to think about through this time.
Yeah. All right, Holly, same question to you.
I think, yeah, like developing that college list, that should, I feel like, be like a driving priority as well. And then I mean, I think if you have a couple things to put on the calendar, even if you're not dealing with them yet, but figuring out, the college list will lead you to the testing question if that's going to happen. Take a look at the testing schedule. It actually gets pretty sparse over summer. So just have a, like a sense too, so you're not blindsided about when you should be making some of these decisions, and plop them on the calendar, right? You can always delete them, but SAT test date in June, or I think that can just be helpful. It's just to decide what you're going to think about later. Or, oh, during, April break, we're going to visit one school. We don't have to decide what it is, but set that aside. Those are some of the things you can do now to ease your mind while you're focusing on the college list and working on building that.
Excellent. Yeah, I know I talk to a lot of junior families this time of year that think it's already too late. We've already lost it. Everybody else knows what they're applying. Like we're done. We're in for it. It's over. And it's just so not true. Now is the exact right time to start to wrap your brain around all this. Start to really go from this imaginary college process into the real thing, right? Which means getting an idea of where your student's going to apply, getting an idea of what their priorities are, having your testing plan figured out, continuing to keep grades up and deepening your experience in activities, and starting to play with some of the writing components that feel a little bit scary. Generally, and you two validate me with when I'm talking to a family, I'll say, the rest of the academic year is all about that. And then over the summer, we kind of slowly ramp things up. The writing really begins in that mid to late summer. Most students are applying to some early deadlines, which will happen in October, but for a lot of kids, that's when the upswing really begins. So the more kind of settling in, wrapping your mind around it, having conversations that don't feel charged and rushed will really set you up for a better experience over the next few months. Um, is that kind of line timeline wise with you both?
Mhm.
Speaking of time, I'm keeping an eye on it. I want to make sure we have an opportunity to take some questions, but I do want to ask one final one to both of you. And that is, what role should parents play in this process? And where do you see people tend to overstep, get in the way? When do things get complicated with parent involvement? Um, Holly, I'd love to hear from you.
Um, I think this time, although it feels daunting, can feel very exciting for parents too, right? Because it's like the culmination of so much, and they can maybe want to, reflect their own opinions about things sooner than a student, or they might feel a little impatient of like, oh, this is a great school. Oh, okay, this is the perfect fit. And it just works better if students begin to develop their own sense of that, even if it takes longer. And they'll learn to trust their judgment more. And the sooner they start learning to trust their judgment, the easier the whole process will be because we're going to need their judgment. So if you give them space to find their own way, decide what's important to them, and obviously your opinion matters so much. Um, yeah, yeah, and then you can contain your excitement in other ways, discuss with other parents, just find ways to direct it that give students space to like make these realizations. I think it'll make a big difference.
Brilliant. Tina, same question.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's definitely important for parents to really trust your child's growth. I think more than the process. I think sometimes that's often lost. I think it's also going off of what Holly said. I think time is a key here. I think it's important to let them to really explore, sometimes stumble. I know sometimes that's hard, for a parent to kind of see, but sometimes they do need to stumble, reflect, and sometimes even pivot if necessary, through the process, because at the end of the day, this is their process. And so I think it's really important that parents don't engineer the outcome or the process, but really let their child be the driver, the full driver of the process, rather than, of course, kind of. I think as a parent, it's important to, of course, be a guidance, right? Really helping them kind of steer the direction. And things like that. But at the end of the day, the child is the driver of the process. I think something that can be very helpful is parents often can really help students hear themselves, since I know, as a parent, you know your child so well. However, I think it is important to, I think, allow students that space to get them there as well before, of course, taking over the process and really redirecting, rewriting, or just, taking initiative of the process. And sometimes students might just need some time to be able to do that.
Very beautiful. I will say maybe to add is just some validation that so many parents I talk to are like, I cannot get my kid to talk to me about this. They are avoiding me. They don't want to talk about it. I try to be sly, I try not to be too excited, and every conversation is getting completely shut down because it's such a stressful, loaded time. I want to validate that that is so normal. I hear it more often than I don't hear it from parents coming in. And that is also where the role of signet or a consultant can really be helpful because I tell parents a lot of times, like, we're probably going to tell them things you've already told them. We're probably going to say things you said to them in the car, and they said, "No, I don't believe you," or "I don't want to hear it." That can sometimes be the pressure valve release, right? That just having somebody else in the mix can offer. And also admitting that maybe you don't know an answer, or you're stressed too, or you're confused, or oh my gosh, I've heard 1,000 things. I don't know, but we're going to figure it out together. Can bring you two together. I've seen that time and time again too. You're all navigating a really stressful and hard experience, and if you can call it out together, and it's only going to make it easier on you both. Um, Okay, we've got a few minutes left. I imagine we've got lots of questions from our audience here. If anybody would like to come on camera, unmute, ask a question, put something in the chat. We've got a few more minutes here. I'm sure we can squeeze in some excellent answers. Hello.
Hi, sorry I was late.
Oh, good, good.
Um, I my child is a weird combination of like super high achieving academically and definitely has a passion project, but also just feels a lot of reticence to move along with the process. We only have like maybe 3 schools that she really loves, and this prospect of applying to 10 schools doesn't feel natural. And it also doesn't feel natural or authentic, um, to be pushing them like this. So, I love you, all of your comments. I've been lurking here and listening, and it's really, really been helpful to hear everything that everyone has said, Holly and Tina, Andrea. So thank you. I don't know. eh, eh, They're really quite young, aren't they?
Yeah, I think
They're young.
a lot of us forget that sometimes, right? That it's a lot of pressure and a lot of work, a lot of expectation. Um, and yeah, that sort of vision of a really high achieving student who could probably do quite well, but the whole process is a lot and not a lot of, drive and excitement at the moment in junior year. Holly, I feel like I'm envisioning a couple students that you worked with this past year. I feel like I'm hearing some resonance. I'd
Yeah,
love to hear your take on this question.
yeah. I usually say okay at that point to 3 schools and say, I'll probably like recommend a few as they come up and we talk, and then you can take a look at them or not. I encourage you to apply early,
Yeah.
and see, right? And then, we'll have some backups and some just in cases and, prepare, and maybe that's fine.
And I of course will apply to more than 3, but I feel like every place you should apply should be a place you really want to go,
Hmm. Yeah.
that you really love and you really would be happy there. And that can't be 15 schools. I mean, I don't know, but my daughter also is very specific. Like she wants a
Hmm.
place with an observatory. She's into astrophysics and astronomy.
Oh, yeah.
So very specific. So that does narrow it down, but yeah, I feel like authenticity is at cross purposes with the whole application process of where you have to create this persona, this character of yourself. So yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry I missed the first 15 minutes because I wanted to get this kind of vision of the black box. Um, what if you have a student who's very high achieving, high grades, high test scores, and she's passion project in the STEM thing, but then she also maybe she was in a play like the year before she came to this application because that's fun,
Yeah.
you know? I mean, what about, character and whimsy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling my smile grow as you talk because like that is exactly what we're saying, right? Is that when we talk about narrative persona, like building this application, it is
Hmm.
really not about pulling her into this profile that we think is
Right, the narrow. Yeah.
it's about finding all those little things that make her whimsical, wonderful, that make her personality come to life, figuring out how we can approach certain essays so that those stories can come to life, and helping her find the schools that value whimsy,
Yeah.
that value the science projects that she wants to do, right? And if she's a student who has that narrow of a view, she might not have 10 schools on her list, like Holly said, and I think that's
Yeah.
very okay. But there also may be more schools that value those things than you think. And that's
Yes,
part of
that's
what
yeah.
a consultant also can offer, right?
Yeah.
Because they might have more of a wide perspective than you do at this point.
Yeah.
We are here at 6:31. I would love to hang a couple more minutes, ladies, if you don't mind, just to
Mhm.
catch some last questions in the chat here. But Caroline, thank you. I really appreciate that question. It was wonderful. Okay, Catherine is here asking, I feel that essays were emphasized in this conversation. Can you comment on the relative weighting of GPA test scores and essays for an applicant, assuming they're all kind of within the target range for a given school? Um, Tina, can you give us your perspective on that?
Yeah, of course. So yes, of course, essays I think really brings, in a lot of ways the students to life, but within the admission process as well, through their evaluation process, yes, we are definitely considering, I think, in my experience at least, of course, reading applications, we are looking at GPA, but I think it's also beyond just the GPA. It's going back to what I had mentioned, really taking into context, of course, the classes students are taking, how much they challenge themselves, right? Because I know each and every single school offers different things, in terms of APs, IBs, college level classes. And so I think all that context really matters. And so GPA is important, but I think it really goes beyond that. Test scores as well. Again, I think it depends on the piece of that we were mentioning, whether it's test optional or not, whether we're considering that. But all these things I think are certainly considered through the process, and to the point of the question, like if it's within target range for a given school, it is being considered, but I think all those other additional avenues, like the essays, the activities, those are the things that I think can really add and bring the student's application to life outside of just, of course, them being in the target range. So I think it is important, right? It is something that's definitely being considered, but it's really, it goes beyond that.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm hearing that yeah, all these things matter, but it's the cohesive picture that applications are being like people are reading their applications based on the cohesive picture. And I think certain schools certainly they may value certain things more than other schools. This mix, it's not very clear all the time. But I also like to remind families that like the essay is the thing that we really have like the most control over right now, right? We don't really have control over um, in the moment a lot of these other stats, right? We don't really have control over what the average test score is at any given school, but the essays can really be the glue that brings everything together and make your students stand out amongst 100 other students that have the same test score and GPA.
Correct.
Great
And I
question.
think, yeah, and I think just one thing to kind of note, I think also, of course, within the context piece as admission decisions are being evaluated, it's also not just, of course, about the verdict of, your child that the decision is being given. It's also, I think, really what the institution's needs are for that year as well, which is, I think, goes back to how volatile I think the process can be at times as well.
Mm, good point. That could be a whole other webinar and it probably will be later this year. Um, okay, I know I kept everybody 5 minutes over time. I couldn't resist. I apologize. But I will like to kind of bring us down to land the plane, as I like to say. Thank you all for spending time with us this evening. I appreciate your patience with the pivot and our facilitation, but Holly and Tina did an excellent job answering our questions here. I know you'll get some follow-up materials. You'll get a recording of today's session and an opportunity if you're interested, if you're not currently an admissions or test prep client with Signet, to schedule some time with us and have a conversation if you're looking for that additional help outside of your own family, which is hard. But again, thanks everybody. Find us if you have any follow-up questions. And if you are anywhere on the East Coast, hang in there. I'm gonna go out and shovel. Okay. Good night, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.